Good afternoon, everybody. I think we're all sufficiently recovered from RE Plus in Anaheim. It's a really big show and excited to bring the audience into the fourth episode of Dispatches from the Energy Transition. Today, we're going to focus on the surge in demand for utility scale energy storage. I think anybody that was walking the floor in Anaheim saw plenty of representation from storage manufacturers, and we're going to dive into that conversation today. For those of you that don't know me, I am the principal of Outfit. Outfit is the clean tech marketing agency, and I am joined by my co-host and frequent coworker, Lucas Miller.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. And thanks for joining, everyone. My name is Lucas Miller, Senior Engineering Consultant at Mayfield Renewables. For those who aren't familiar with Mayfield, we perform third-party engineering services for C&I, small utility scale, and microgrid projects, as well as some education services for the solar plus storage industry at large. I'm excited to dig into this topic today. I know we have two very knowledgeable guests, really excited to chat with these guys. First up, we have Drew Lebowitz, Principal and Managing Director at PowerSwitch. Drew, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Yeah, I'm based here in Portland, Oregon, and I lead PowerSwitch. We are a energy storage advisory firm. Most of our work is associated with the finance and conceptual design stages of utility scale storage projects, primarily in North America, but we work on projects all over the world. And it's great to be with you on the webinar today.
So great to have a fellow Portlander on the call. And last but not least, we have Jordan Harrison, Product Strategy Manager at CPS America. Welcome, Jordan. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Again, Jordan Harrison, Product Strategy here at CPS America. Been with the company about 2 years now, just over 2 years. Background in electrical engineering. I actually started off on the application engineering team here. Then about a year ago, moved into a product strategy role, looking more kind of future project and products that we can bring out to market with a new focus on our battery energy storage, which we'll get into a little bit more.
Right. Yeah. Let's get into it, and maybe to set the table a bit. Jordan, do you want to give us a quick overview of CPS America? Just more broadly speaking, what does CPS America do? How long have you guys been in the U.S. market? Just a quick overview would be great.
Yeah. So CPS America, we're a PV string inverter and battery energy storage solutions provider. We've been in the U.S. since 2012. We are headquartered out of Richardson, Texas, which is just north of Dallas. And that facility contains our service center, a lot of R&D based out of there. We have additional offices in Somerville, New Jersey, where our sales and business operations sits. In the Bay Area, California, we have engineering and a lot of our customer operations. And Pomona, California, we have our fulfillment center. Additionally, we have tons of team members spread throughout the U.S. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. We have a lot of team members, kind of spread around again through different markets to help support those local businesses.
Great. And I'm guessing that maybe some folks in the audience are going to be familiar with CPS America, but maybe more so as a string inverter manufacturer. I know, as you have noted here, #1 market leader in three-phase string. But if you go back in time to early mid 2010s, I know you guys did have a battery product. So can you talk a bit about kind of the evolution of the CPS products, why you guys are just starting to get back into storage, and maybe why that's a strategic move for CPS?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, #1 market leader, three-phase string PV inverters for 7 consecutive years now, something we're really proud of, and as a testament to not only our product, but also our service team. So great service and product. most bankable inverter brand globally, and that was voted on by Bloomberg NEF. 20,000 sites, 8+ gigawatts PV deployed. So, again, kind of a big focus historically on the PV market, and kind of a, real quick timeline of our product. Around 2013, first product was a 14 kilowatt inverter. And then we look, forward now, getting more into, bigger projects, utility scale, where we have, up to 350 kilowatt inverter. So, wide range of products in PV. And like you mentioned, BESS is not something we're new to. Like you mentioned, 2018, we had our first C&I system, smaller commercial industrial scale battery energy storage system. It was a 30 kilowatt, 65 kilowatt hour system. And we offered a couple of different sizes, but, again, that was 2018, kind of ripe for, COVID, a lot of the supply constraints. So we did have about 30 of those systems deployed. And, again, with COVID, a lot of the supply constraints, especially for, the battery components, something we, put on pause to really focus in on our core business, which, is that PV market. But something a couple years ago, we really brought back, we see here, we have a large team, a lot of support from our global brand as well. So a lot of resources to put into both markets. So we're not taking away from PV. We're just adding a new focus on the battery energy storage sector.
Great. And I know as a part of this work, there's a lot of strategy that goes into, right, entering a new market, expanding from PV focus, now larger scale PV. So expanding from C&I to large scale PV, and then on top of that, introducing storage as well. And so want to turn it to Robert. I know we worked a bit together, Outfit and CPS, on some of that go-to-market strategy and content. So Robert, want to turn it to you here.
That's great. I appreciate it, Lucas. Good to see you, Jordan. We've been working with CPS for much of the year. A key aspect of this work has been education and technical marketing on the value proposition of string inverters, in particular for the utility scale market segment. And something that I get asked about a lot, we talked about quite a bit at the RE Plus conference, is 3D animation and its value for manufacturers and service providers. A thing about 3D work is it's easy to control. We take product renders, we can deploy them, illustrate them in different formats. In contrast to film, it's a little bit more predictable about how you use things. And in this instance, you can kind of see the balance of system, the various components. We do an X-ray here of the 5 megawatt energy storage power block, kind of really diving into the value proposition of the system. Jordan, kind of curious from your vantage point, just talking a little bit on the battery side here. What do you see as some of the advantages of CPS's products on the battery side?
Yeah, so I'll kind of back up and maybe narrate a little bit of what we're seeing. So we're seeing, both PV product and our energy storage, our battery energy storage system here. And we highlighted the 350 kilowatt on the PV side. Like Robert mentioned, a lot of the balance of system equipment, breaker box, switch box, medium voltage transformer skid. So really the idea for both PV and on the BESS side is we're looking to provide a total solution from inverter to medium voltage transformer skid on the PV side. And then on the battery side, we're looking, from battery again to the medium voltage transformer skid. So, highlighting kind of on the battery energy storage system, 5 megawatt hour BESS container. And we were the first with the 5 megawatt hour in a 20-foot container. So again, something we are really proud of. And then to pair with that, we have our 2.4 megawatt PCS skid. So that contains 12 of our 200 kilowatt string inverters for battery systems, as all of the balances systems integrated in the skid. So your AC breakers, main breaker for the AC side, medium voltage transformer, and auxiliary power transformer for a lot of the BESS controls, cooling system, things like that.
I'm going to ask a question for the group before we dive into this single line.
Yeah.
Are you, Drew and Jordan, are you guys surprised about how quickly energy storage is growing in the industry, or is it what you expected this year?
I think we've been seeing it go up, especially after the IRA was passed to allow storage, and that was, I think, the big boost. But even by those predictions, when that actually came into law in 2023, I think things have really taken off in an amazing way. There's been just a huge investment in projects, new products coming out, mostly utility scale, but then we see more in the C&I space coming along, also resi. The biggest surprise I've seen is the price. Prices seem to really have come down very quickly. And of course, that's just going to make deployments go up even faster.
Jordan, your vantage point working with CPS?
Yeah, I think it's pretty exciting market to be in, especially from a equipment manufacturing perspective. Just seeing the innovation and cell energy density allows us to pack in huge energy density in a small footprint. Again, we're at 5 megawatt hours in a 20-foot high cube container, so it's tons of energy in a very small space. Advancements in cooling. So in 2022 we actually released air cooled system. It was 3.4 megawatt hours. And at the time, that was the highest power density for air-cooled system. And then, a year later, we release the liquid-cooled system, which is our 5 megawatt hour. So, just the advancements in technology that we're seeing, it's really exciting to be a part of.
Before I hand it back over to Lucas, I mean, working in this industry for almost 20 years, I feel like the 2020s are the decade of storage. It's kind of remarkable to see at RE Plus how many manufacturers are entering this game, and it's exciting. It's an exciting time to be in the industry.
And I do want to spend a minute or two more just kind of overviewing the system here. Maybe just starting from the battery itself. And I know we had a couple pre-submitted questions about this, but is this a lithium ion energy storage? What's the battery chemistry like? Anything else to note on the battery container itself?
Yeah, so we're using LFP, lithium iron phosphate chemistry for the cells. And the cells are the only part that we purchase from other suppliers. And then we integrate those into our modules, which is again CPS design. Everything apart from the cells, which we use only tier 1 suppliers. Everything else CPS designed and manufactured. So from the pack and then integrating everything into the container itself. Integrated fire suppression system. Let's see, again, liquid cooled. So we're really packing a lot into, again, this small footprint.
And my final question here, this single line in particular, it calls out a lot of components.
Yep.
One of the trends that I think we're starting to see more and more is integration. So one manufacturer producing more and more products to integrate at a system level. From looking at the single line and the animation before, it seems that CPS is producing more and more of these balance of system components. So could you talk a bit about kind of what strategically that looks like for CPS, and anything else that you'd want to highlight about any of the balance of system components we're looking at here?
Yeah, and I'll kind of break it up. So real quickly on the PV side, we were one of the first to have the 800-volt output for our inverters, and we saw maybe a little slower adoption than we were expecting as far as suppliers for even things like breakers and the bus bars, to a lesser extent, but a lot of the equipment to go along with the inverters was missing at the time. 2022-ish timeframe, we released our 275, which was previous to the 350. So we kind of saw that lack of product in the market. So it's something we wanted to offer to our customers, so they can be successful in their projects. So we released the breaker box. So for the 350, it's a 2-to-1, so 2 breakers. So we have these clusters of 2 350 kilowatt PV inverters to 1 breaker box. We have the switch box, which we see more close coupled with our transformer skid. And then, of course, the medium voltage transformer skid itself. So really, from the inverter to, really transformer skid is everything that CPS can supply for utility scale. And then, similar story on the BESS side, battery container and PCS skid, really looking to have everything integrated. So it's, real easy for our customers to, essentially, drop these on site, simple hookup, wiring wise, and you're, ready for your system.
Great. And actually, one more question for you, just while we have this one on screen. It looks like we're AC coupling the PV and the energy storage at the substation level here. Is that common for these utility scale projects to AC couple? Is it commonly happening at that substation level? And anything you can add there?
Yeah, I mean, from we're seeing, and maybe Drew can add in here, but we're seeing a lot of on the PV plus storage side being AC coupled, and that in our experience is happening at that medium voltage substation level. And the other benefit of this AC coupled system is that you can utilize the same system for standalone storage projects. And Drew mentioned IRA really opening up the incentives for standalone projects is something we're seeing, a lot of projects being built with, especially ERCOT territory, and then, even throughout the US, for these standalone projects.
Yeah, and just to chime in on that, I'm seeing the same thing. PowerSwitch, we just are seeing more and more AC coupled projects, and those projects tend to be connected up at the substation level. I think part of that is a function of the scale of them. The bigger the project gets, the more it makes sense to have dedicated circuits that go to these different aspects of the project. But also, I think evolution of products. So PCSs or bidirectional inverters like the CPS ones you see here have gotten more and more efficient, and the costs have continued to improve. And because of both of those things, it's become more common to see AC coupled, even though you don't have some of the technical benefits of a DC coupled system. It's a little simpler. Don't want to get too deep in the weeds on that, but that's what we're seeing every year, more and more AC coupled.
Well, with that, maybe let's transition here and talk about PowerSwitch. So Drew, you alluded to it a little bit there. Do you want to tell us a bit more about PowerSwitch as a company, the typical projects that you guys are working on?
Sure. So as I mentioned, we are an advisory firm. We provide consulting services in 3 major areas. The biggest is owner's engineering, or OE services. So our typical scope would be working with a developer of a project that maybe they've done wind or solar projects, but haven't done as many battery projects, or they want to have someone on their team that knows really the ins and outs of negotiating these supply agreements, of what each individual battery technology provider brings to the table, where costs are at. So we help the developers kind of learn those things, navigate those environments. We run RFPs for them. So putting out tenders to help identify storage suppliers or inverter suppliers or controls manufacturers. And then everything all the way up through financing, things like helping them negotiate some of the finer point terms of the agreements of those sometimes massive supply agreements. As these systems get bigger, we're seeing, sometimes a single contract over $100 million for battery supply. So obviously every term in there is really important to get right. We also do a lot of independent engineering. So that would be when either on the buy side or the sell side, someone is going to buy a project. Could be early stage project as it's just getting off the ground, or it could be an operational project, helping them run through all the aspects of the project, or the battery tech, the PCS, all the aspects of that. Are they up to snuff? And are they going to be a successful project? Or for operational projects, have there been incidents, either safety or performance, that are different than what was expected for that system? We also do a lot of trainings. So we have a list of curriculums that we can put together. We've done some for manufacturers of storage systems. We've done some for developers, for owners, for all kinds of different parties, helping educate them on what's out there in the marketplace. And we can really craft the trainings just to what is needed. And lastly, part of PowerSwitch is dedicated to energy access. And those are different types of projects. Some of them are very large, but they're all devoted toward the billion-plus people that do not have reliable, sustainable, affordable access to electricity. But we take a for-profit approach of finding solutions that go out there and can create business models that work to electrify those communities. Some of them are off-grid systems, some of them are on-grid, some are huge mines that are in remote areas, but that's another part of PowerSwitch. We are a team of 4 people across the US. You can see me out on a big storage site there. We participated in a lot of different trainings and seminars on batteries as well.
Go
ahead, Robert.
I've known you for a little bit over a year, and I think you're a pretty smart guy. So I'm going to give you an audience question that I think will be good for the group a bit. Troy Spraker from Lamp Reinerson's asking, this is of interest to me. I spent a little bit of time at the conference. What battery technology is being used for utility scale BESS? We're aware of lithium ion, but there's alternative technologies that are beginning to come to market, flow batteries, vanadium. What's your perspective here at this point?
So if we look at it historically, 2015, 2016 was when the first utility scale energy storage systems came online, at least in the US. And since then, we've gone on an exponential curve, getting bigger and bigger. The very first systems were lithium ion, but with a NMC chemistry. But gradually, over the course of that past almost decade, that systems have been coming online and getting bigger. Lithium iron phosphate, or LFP, has tended to dominate. But that's another variety of lithium ion. These other technologies have made a lot of strides. There's a flow battery company, ESS, right here in our backyard in Oregon, and many others that you see headlines about. But really, from a megawatt hours deployed point of view, lithium ion is running away with it. It's, I would say, over 99% of utility scale systems are lithium ion. There is that split between NMC and LFP. There are some rising stars, such as sodium ion or iron air chemistries, which say they're going to dethrone lithium one day. But as it stands right now, lithium is king.
And some of those alternate chemistries that we've talked about, especially flow batteries, are often at least billed as long duration storage options. Can you talk a bit about, is there demand for that these days? I'd imagine, especially at this large scale, these could be, a useful grid asset from a utility perspective. But any demand that you're seeing, any use cases you're seeing for those long duration storage options, Drew?
Sure. Yeah, just a quick bit of background for anyone who doesn't know. So it's common that storage would be talked about duration wise, and that means when you fully discharge the battery, meaning when the battery is fully charged, if you discharge at its full allowed power, how many hours will it take to discharge? And in those early days, I was talking about, say, 2015, 2016, you'd see systems built that were half-hour discharge. So they would discharge all their power in a half an hour. And one of the things the industry learned was if you build batteries like that, at least lithium ion, they don't do very well. They tend to degrade very quickly. So you can build them so they discharge more slowly, but to a certain point, that lithium ion has a sweet spot for its cost structure that is around 2 hour to 4 hour is really the kind of sweet spot for lithium ion. Anything beyond that, say 6 hour, 8 hour, or now we're seeing talk of hundreds of hour duration. That is what would be called LDES, or long duration energy storage. And as Lucas alluded to, a lot of that is driven by markets. That's one thing you see about storage. It's very regulatory dependent. Unlike PV or wind, it doesn't produce energy, right? So you have to have some market mechanism where you're going to be able to make a revenue one way or the other. And up until now, the vast majority of tenders and markets have been geared more toward that 2 to 4 hour range. We just haven't seen a huge demand for those longer duration markets. Now, are those coming? I think they are. And part of it is a function of the tech. The tech wasn't there, so there was no market. So it's which leads and which follows. So we're starting to see some pilot programs being done for those longer duration. But really, I think time will tell. For now, 2 to 4 hour really is the vast majority of installs.
All right, we just got 2 more audience questions that I'm going to actually move us back a slide while we talk about these. Sorry, back a slide. First one, probably more for you, Jordan. We talked about AC coupling here at the substation level, so at medium voltage level. This question's from the audience. Do you also supply the plant control system that takes into account the medium voltage side? Nowadays, we tend to deploy medium voltage, microgrid, off-grid, end-to-end systems in Africa, but we're struggling to find controllers that work at the medium voltage level. So anything that you can add there?
Yeah, so we do focus on the hardware component. So for the energy management system, we're agnostic. So we work with a variety of those suppliers, but not a space that we're in right now as far as providing that EMS. Again, we're agnostic, to any supplier, and we've worked with all the major ones.
Just to chime in quickly on this, when you say controls, that can mean a lot of different things. Batteries have a lot of layers of controls. There's some BMS at the battery level up to EMS, which is higher, and then power plant controller, SCADA. So it's a whole world. There are some suppliers that cover it all and others that are focused on a single aspect. But if you contact me, there's many that are working in the MV space that you could work with depending on what your needs are.
Yeah, I was just going to say, sorry, Drew, I was just going to say, Drew, you could probably have a class on the integration of hardware and software alone. And batteries present a lot of challenges and opportunities in that regard.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then I'll just add real quick. So we do have integrated BMS, battery management system. So that's integral to the actual battery packs. And then at a container level, and that's really a safety for the battery cells, packs, and then, racks, container level. And we monitor at, all of those different levels. But as far as the EMS, that's the part where we do not supply a solution.
Great. And we're getting more and more questions. I want to encourage everyone in the audience, keep adding them. Q&A tab is the best place for us to find them rather than the chat tab. We did get one question for you, Drew. Would you mind providing a brief overview about the challenges with a DC coupled battery energy storage system in a solar farm that the industry has been facing?
Sure. Yeah. So for those who don't know, DC coupled would mean that, like if you see in the diagram we're looking at here, you have your solar going into the inverter immediately, and then the battery has its own inverter at the bottom. DC coupled would be where you have a battery and solar behind a single inverter. So some of the challenges that come with that are that you're feeding in voltages onto a single bus, and the PV voltages are going up and down. The battery voltages are generally more stable, but you have more components. You have to have an additional piece of hardware called a DC to DC converter to allow that to happen. And it's a challenge from a controls perspective to have these two different types of DC current sources, the battery and the solar, working together. And so because of that, there have been some safety issues, some technical issues, some controls issues. Just more complexity means more things that could go wrong. Another thing is that you have to have the battery spread out among the solar array, which creates some complications in building them, maintaining them. So I don't want to go too deep on this, probably could have its own webinar. But the consensus has been that those problems are not really worth the hassle. And that's why we've moved more toward AC coupled.
Sure, I just want to touch on something real quick because I've heard it a lot the past 2 to 3 years. Energy storage is here to stay, right? It's growing, it's accelerating. And I've seen from an engineering project developer, EPC perspective, some companies that are reticent to dive in. I mean, like, maybe this gets into your book a bit, but do you help advise the roadmap? Like, how do you get more involved into this space?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different pathways for different companies. We've seen some firms that are great at solar, and they say, we're going to stick with solar and not touch storage. We don't want it. And, some of them have been very successful. Others that say, forget solar, we want to do just storage. So really, I think it depends on the commercial priorities of a firm, or if it's an individual, what your personal path is. I think both these industries are going to be around for a really long time. Solar, keeps getting cheaper. It's becoming, ubiquitous. Storage also, I think it will be around for a long time. I do think there'll be probably some big changes in chemistry. I think if we look 15 years from now, the systems are going to look quite a bit different. But I do think that will be storage, just might be a different variety. And it's still very early days based on where most predictions of the market think we're going to go.
Jordan, I'll kind of tee that up a little bit for you a bit. And knowing Brian Wagner and the strength of your team, how do you as a manufacturer work with project developers and try to get them up to speed on this technology?
Yeah, I think it's really finding the fit for our product, and kind of like what Drew was saying. A lot of firms kind of specialize in, maybe it's a certain size project. You're 10 to 50 megawatt, maybe you're 1 to 10 megawatt. So it's kind of finding where our solution fits in. Now, I think how our system's kind of constructed, more modular. It allows us to be used in a wider variety of applications and projects. So it's, yeah, I mean, I guess just kind of informing customers of our solutions. And we do have a great team, a very large engineering team, both applications on the PV side and a separate battery team that can, help work with our customers and see how we can, integrate BESS into their existing projects or upcoming projects that they're working on.
And as we get further into the presentation here, I know we're going to touch a lot on standalone storage. So while we're still on PV coupled with energy storage, I do want to get to just one or two other questions from the audience. First is, how have the sizing principles for energy storage systems that are co-located with solar evolved over the years? And so I'd maybe open this up even further to just the use case of PV plus storage, if you guys have seen any evolution with regard to functionality there, but also want to definitely touch on the sizing aspect as well.
Well, when I meet people at cocktail parties and they ask me what I do, I say the real simple way is, I work in batteries and we have a ton of solar in the daytime, and you can put the solar in the batteries and they discharge after the sun goes down. Gross oversimplification, but that is actually one of the big use cases. And we see markets like California, for example, where they've had so much solar penetration and so much incentives for solar that it's made a great case to have energy storage come online and shift some of that solar around to coincide more closely with the peaks that you see, which is typically after the sun goes down, everyone gets home and turns on their lights and plugs in their EV, and the demand really spikes. So I think that's kind of your traditional use case. But that said, there's all kinds of different markets. We worked on a project in Australia where it had to do with a transmission line that was getting overloaded. So they put on energy storage to allow that transmission line to be more loaded in case it went down, and the battery could jump in. Or you see other cases where it's starting to get paired with wind now, or it's doing frequency regulation, which is a battery floating at 50% and going up and down sort of as a shock absorber. So the short answer is it depends. Every market is a little different and markets evolve. But I think that use case that I described in the beginning, that still is a really, really big one, and one of the biggest that we've seen so far.
Just want to make a comment about the regionalization and the segmentation of the storage market. So Mark Stat's making a comment here. There was a recent CPUC decision for 12 plus hour duration, 1 gigawatt, 12 plus hour, 1 gigawatt multi-day RFPs to start in the next 2 years. I know there's a lot going on with the CPUC these days, but I do think in the industry, the regional aspect and trying to track all these things is a job in and of itself.
Final question for me, and then we'll get to some PowerSwitch, some more system architecture examples. We did get a question from Luke in the audience. This one's for you, Jordan. If you can just tell us a bit about any fire suppression systems that your team uses on this battery system.
Yep. So we do have integrated fire suppression. It's an aerosol system extinguisher. So we have heat and smoke detectors throughout the container. And then again, the aerosol, which will direct that chemical, to the rack that's experiencing the runaway. And then I see it's specific manufacturers. Yeah, that's we kind of keep our suppliers trade secret, but yeah, it's an aerosol suppression system that we use.
Great. So we're going to segue. Drew was one of the authors for a new book, the BESS Book. Plenty of free time. I started reading it this weekend. Drew, an initial impression that I had, and you can kind of delve into the why here. This is really a comprehensive approach on BESS. Did you think that was critical to get in the book, the financing side, the development side, the chemistry side? I'm really kind of impressed about the breadth of topics that you're covering here.
Well, I appreciate you allowing the shameless plug here, but we myself with two former DNV colleagues, I used to work at DNV, which is a leading battery storage advisor across all types of renewable energy. We realized that we were working in energy storage and we were figuring it out every project we'd come to, which is a great way as a consultant to get more knowledge, but there wasn't a centralized source where all these things were being written down, and they were changing very quickly. Sometimes 3 to 6 months, you'd see products you hadn't seen, just like this new product from CPS, coming on the market, changing things, giving customers new options. And so we decided to little by little get things down in a central location. We started to try to go really wide, but realized if we covered every topic, it would be 1,000 pages long, and it would be a better doorstop than a book. And so we tried to hone in, first of all, on utility scale. There's a lot happening in C&I and Resi, but I think the biggest growth is in utility. We decided to focus only on lithium ion. We do talk about some different applications like VPPs or V2G, but lithium ion is the bulk of the book. And then we decided to say we wanted to look at it at a pretty high level. So we go into a little of the chemistry, the tech, the finance, but we don't go to the bottom of all those topics. But the goal is to be comprehensive enough so someone coming to the industry can get a pretty broad view of it, but also folks that are in the industry really can understand each topic in a little greater depth and from other angles that they might not have seen before.
Just kind of a follow-up question in regard to that. Has any of the feedback you've gotten about the book surprised you yet?
I think we've had a lot of positive feedback. It was fun at RE Plus, you know, to have so many people come up and be so grateful, especially younger folks. I think that was one thing I didn't quite think of is, you know, people that are just coming into the industry saying, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much for this. It helps me do my job better." You know, it's just great to hear that younger folks, you know, that are coming to this industry can really get brought up to speed pretty quickly by reading it. And the other thing I'd say that surprised us was the international response has been really strong. You know, people in India and Estonia and Australia and all these markets, some of which really have very few batteries, but even regulators have said, you know, how do I design a market to get storage, to get batteries to come to my country, which is really exciting to kind of look at it from that perspective and see how many people it was able to reach.
Thanks for that, Drew. That's an interesting note. I would kind of say something. People have been asking me a little bit about dispatches, and something that's been a little surprising to me is we're seeing more international attendance as well. So it's kind of great seeing the impact that is happening in the industry. I think we're going to segue here, Lucas, to some system architecture. All right,
Sure,
let's EC block here. Let's start us off.
Yeah, I think we've touched on these with some of the really good questions we've had already. But just to run through quickly, there are in the family of energy storage products, you can kind of have two big approaches. The first, which is a little more traditional, is called the DC block approach. You can see a picture here. This is by a supplier FlexGen. And FlexGen actually is a supplier that doesn't make their own PCS or batteries. They use others, but they brand it as a full solution. But the way you can tell is you have an energy storage container on the right, and then you have a PCS or a bidirectional inverter on the left. And if you look on the top, you can see those are medium voltage transformers that are usually located right next to that PCS. If you look at the single line diagram, you can see that you have all these DC blocks. So each of those squares would represent a rack, which is inside the enclosure or the container. And then you can see you have your PCS or inverter, the transformer, and it feeds on up to the grid. Those voltages they vary from project to project, depending on region, but more or less that's the range you'll see. You'll see it's important you usually have aux power fed via a separate circuit, although you have some, as Jordan mentioned, CPS's product that has the aux built right into their skid. So the important thing to note with this system is that you have two separate boxes. You can buy those either from the same manufacturer, such as what CPS has. You can buy it and it comes all together, or you can buy them separately. You could say get a Powin battery and pair that with a power electronics inverter, just to name two of the more popular products that are out there. If we go to the next slide, we'll see a newer type of architecture that we've started seeing. So Tesla, with their Megapack product, was the first to go this route, but a few others have followed. Notably, we have SunGrow, who has come up with a product that uses this architecture, and also more recently, Wärtsilä came out with a product that uses this. And the difference is this: if we look at those blue boxes on the bottom of the single line, those represent the enclosure, and inside the enclosure you have many small inverters or PCSs, coupled with sometimes it's a few racks or sometimes it's a few modules. It just depends, but you'll have some amount of DC energy in a battery coupled with a inverter, and that is repeated several times in each enclosure. You'll see that voltage-wise, you don't have the DC voltage coming out of the container anymore. You only get the AC out, right? And so all that inverting PCS function is happening on the inside of the container. Some pros and cons of each of these systems. The DC block offers you a little more flexibility. So for example, if you wanted to have a PCS that was of a certain size or a certain brand, you could pick that and then pair it with whichever DC block you want. Whereas in contrast, if you want to use a Sungrow AC block product, you can't pick a different inverter. You're kind of married to that PCS. We've seen some cases like in Taiwan, there's a market where it's really, really valuable to have a 3-hour storage system, which is kind of rare in the industry. Usually we see 2 or 4. So if you go to, say, Megapack, Tesla, they only offer a 2-hour and a 4-hour. You cannot get a 3-hour just because that's the way it comes. So DC block gives you a little more flexibility, but on the downside, it gives you a little more complication. You have to deal with multiple parties. Maybe they don't talk well to one another. There's controls challenges, a lot of other things that are a little more complex going from the DC block to the AC block. I wanted to point out that the CPS approach, I think, is actually sort of somewhere in between. So they, Jordan, feel free to jump in if I'm getting this correct, but they're offering a single offering that is DC block in the sense that it's separate, but you're buying it all from CPS, and therefore you avoid some of the difficulties you might run into with a traditional DC block solution.
Yeah, exactly. So, like Drew said, a lot of times there could be complications from buying your battery from one supplier, the DC block, and then your PCS from another one. Again, there's a lot of talking that goes on between the battery and the PCS itself. So with our solution coming, all from CPS, that's something we've taken care of, before we ship it out to our customers.
So there's a pretty wide, yeah, go ahead, Lucas.
Just on the CPS note, really quick, Jordan, going back to the example we showed earlier, you have the 5 megawatt-hour battery container, right? So inside that container, if we imagine it's this blue box here, we have many stacks of batteries. We don't have the inverters, though. The inverter is on a separate skid. Each of those inverters, though, is tied to a single stack within the battery unit, correct? So in other words, this stack here feeds one inverter that's separate from the battery container. This stack feeds another inverter that's separate to it. Could you talk a little bit about, the thought process behind that, and maybe what kind of doors that opens up with regard to like switching batteries, for example?
Yeah, and I think Drew has a slide here kind of highlighting that, so I won't steal all the thunder here, but yeah, I mean, really, taking a more and we call it a string inverter for the battery, kind of taken from our string inverter approach for a PV. It really allows us to control each battery rack, like Lucas said, each rack in our container, 12 total, pairs with one PCS, and so 12 total on the PCS skid as well. So again, a lot of the benefits that we see with the modular PCS, several repeating units. So if one, battery pack fails or PCS fails, you're only down that, small power producing unit. In our case, 200 kilowatt, as opposed to a central PCS, you'd be down your whole, 2.5 megawatt or a larger block. And then, like Lucas mentioned, for, if you're changing out batteries, in the case of a centralized PCS, if you wanted to change one rack of batteries, it would impact the, production if you had older batteries throughout the container with one rack of new batteries. And, maybe a topic on its own, but, essentially that new rack of batteries will only produce what the older batteries will. So yeah, with our solution, you can replace batteries or augment, missing racks in a container without adding, whole new containers. And so yeah, it just gives a lot of flexibility on design and O&M for the system.
Yeah, and that's a great example of an evolution that we've seen in the industry. And this comes whether using a DC block product or an AC block. So AC blocks, by definition, are usually modular, and that's because the way the system is built, it's usually a few modules connected with the PCS. So many different PCSs altogether. Some companies actually make that into a single block that can come in and out. That's connected on the AC bus. But again, in a way, the CPS solution is moving towards sort of this middle ground between an AC block and a DC block, because you have, as Jordan was explaining, you have each individual rack of batteries can be connected to a portion of the PCS, and that will increase availability, right? Because if you have part of the PCS can go down and you can swap that out, you don't lose the entire central inverter the way you would in a centralized PCS system. Of course, there is some added complexity that comes with that. I think you have to send multiple signals to the different individual PCSs to tell it different commands, but ultimately that makes it more flexible, even though it's more complex. One important thing is that over time, systems may age in different ways. So you may have one rack that's aging more quickly than another, and a system that's modular allows you to dial the power up or down to compensate for that, allows your system to age more uniformly over time.
Sure, I kind of want to bring up a talking point for the group because I'm kind of curious everybody's perspective. It backs into my finance background prior to energy. I'm kind of curious about the balance and project development between CapEx and OpEx, especially when we're looking at moving forward. Just your perspective here and utility scale between the two.
Well, any system has a balance of CapEx and OpEx, right? So CapEx is everything you have to spend in the beginning, and then your OpEx over time could be divided into preventative OpEx. So things you have to do on a periodic basis to take care of things, and corrective. So when you have to jump in and make some changes. When it comes to energy storage, one of the biggest expenses on the OpEx front is augmentation. And again, that probably could be its own webinar, but that refers to adding more batteries to the system, either on the DC or the AC side as it ages. And that's one where really how you use them, how you've designed the system, what products you're using play a big role in how much augmentation you will do. And that's a big expense you have throughout the life of the system. Just is a balance of how much do I want to spend up front versus down the road, especially as we know that energy storage costs are falling. So a lot of owners and developers say, I want to buy it as late as possible because every year it will get a little cheaper.
And are you guys seeing, so Mayfield, we actually just had a class session this morning where we were looking at utility scale ESS, and we got a bunch of questions about DC to DC converters. Specifically for a DC coupled PV plus energy storage system, where the DC to DC converter could be between the PV and your main inverter, or it could be between the ESS and your main inverter. Are you guys seeing much of that at the utility scale? Are there any benefits that the audience should be aware of to integrating a DC to DC converter in these circuits?
But anytime you're mixing either new and old batteries, or in the case of DC coupled, it's the PV mixing with the battery. You need a DC to DC converter in order to make sure that the DC voltages are within the same range. Otherwise, you would have some different potential on the same bus, which could be dangerous or affect the performance. And so that's kind of a necessary ingredient either for DC coupled solar plus storage or for DC augmented battery systems, depending on how the architecture is. But I think in both those cases, as time has gone by, we've seen that inverters are getting better and more efficient, and the challenges of having those mix of either old and new or solar or battery is really not worth it. That the trend, just as we've moved more from DC coupled to AC coupled solar plus storage, we've also moved toward more AC augmentation rather than DC augmentation.
Got it. And then sticking just on the inverter side, we've kind of alluded to this, but this conversation of the centralized versus modular PCS on the battery side, I think we could, easily extend that analogy to the PV side, distributed string inverters versus either a virtual central with all your string inverters together, or an actual central inverter that's much larger than your string. Jordan, can you tell us a bit about what that trade-off looks like at the utility scale? What maybe some of the benefits could be of string versus central, or vice versa?
Yeah, and for PV specific?
For PV, if you want to open it up to storage as well, feel free.
Yeah. So, CPS, we took the approach of, true string inverters for utility scale. Again, our 350 kilowatt is kind of what we're promoting now. It's our latest in the utility scale space. And there is a trade-off. So, for our 350, it'd be more distributed out into the array, so close to where your modules are. And it's a lot of the same benefits that we see on the ESS side with the modular PCS. So you get, better control, increased energy harvesting because you do have multiple MPPTs. We got 15 on our 350. So, like Drew was mentioning on the battery side, as a lot of those will age differently throughout the container or even rack itself. Same thing happens on the solar module. Even things like shading, soiling, all these components that factor into losses on the PV side. You can mitigate more of those losses with the string and the multiple MPPTs. On the centralized side, there may be some benefits. You again, kind of like we see on the PCS side. Some people may consider it more simple because you have one large 4 megawatt inverter versus several 350s. But it's really a trade-off. Again, at CPS, we took the approach. We see the huge benefit in the string inverters, multiple MPPTs. I will say, we are looking at coming out with products on the PV side to more mimic our PCS solution here, where you have the modular type setup or, the virtual central setup for PV as well, to kind of marry the benefits of both solutions.
And I did want to add, just coming out of RE Plus, it seemed like a lot of the PCS manufacturers are going this route. I saw EPC Power's new PCS had this approach, and then Power Electronics reached out to me just before the webinar and said, we're doing that too, after they saw the title of the webinar. So I think it's happening in a lot of corners of the industry, and it's great to see products evolving to give the consumers more flexibility.
Awesome. Well, we are approaching the top of the hour. Want to start closing us out here. We tried to distill this down into some key takeaways. I know we've touched on quite a lot during the hour. We will have contact information available for everyone. Post webinar, we're going to send everyone a recording to this as well. So encourage you to continue engaging with us, asking questions if we didn't get to answer them today. But really, to simplify it down, market conditions are changing, technologies are evolving rapidly. It can be difficult to keep up with all of this. So leverage experts, leverage resources like Drew's BESS book whenever you can to try to stay as up to date as possible. And then on the system side, there are always trade-offs between more centralized versus distributed system architectures, whether it's on the storage side or it's storage plus PV. There's just a lot to consider on all of these projects. So again, going back to educating yourself about the options available can go a long way to making those decisions. And then last one here, selecting a battery based on your application. We've really focused a lot on lithium ion here today, but like we touched on, there definitely are more and more emerging technologies as well, particularly on the long duration side. Robert, any other closing arguments?
I think we solved it all. I'm best in one webinar, covered everything.
That's right.
Yeah, I really appreciate Jordan and Drew's time today. Here's their contact information. Really great guests joining the conversation. We will have 3 more dispatches episodes this year. We're reaching out to some leading industry manufacturers and service providers to button up those dates. I do want to highlight, as kind of a next step, Mayfield Renewables is hosting their very first education summit in Austin, Texas on October 3rd. And my cohort here, Lucas, is actually teaching a workshop with Tyson and Mayfield on UL 9540A and energy storage fire risks. So this guy keeps himself pretty busy. Lucas, as we kind of wind down, just a real quick note on the education summit.
Yeah, so this is next week. So if you're in the Austin area, would love to have you attend. It's just going to be one day, all day, NABCEP certified sessions led by Mayfield. CPS will be there leading a sessions from Agito, Megger, Zendi. So we're covering everything from NEC codes and standards all the way to engineering best practices, product listing, fire safety. So we'll include some links in the follow-up email with this recording, but just want to get that out there. If anyone in the Austin area is looking for some NABCEP credits or a day of education, I'd love to have you join us next Thursday.
And with that, we'll conclude this episode of Dispatches. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank
Thanks
you.
all.